Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this event. I'm Jessica Hellman, Executive Director for the Institute on the Environment, Ecolab Chair for Environmental Leadership, and Professor at the University of Minnesota. The Institute on the Environment, or I-ON-E as we call it, is a community of people working to advance sustainability through collaborative research, leadership and education programming, and public interest storytelling and communications. Sharing ideas and forging connections through events is one of the ways we help to build a future where people and the planet prosper together. On September 30th, 2022, the Institute's community gathered for our 6th annual meeting, and we wanted to share a fascinating panel discussion with you that occurred that day as part of our People and Planet Conversation series. The discussion focused on the role of national and multinational corporations and academia in collective sustainability, social responsibility, and community building efforts. And we were honored to have Michael Kobori, Chief Sustainability Officer at Starbucks Coffee Company, as a featured guest speaker, alongside Susanna Gibbons, I&E Fellow and Managing Director for the Carlson Funds Enterprise, and Beth Mercer-Taylor, I&E's Co-Program Director of Sustainability Education. 2 University of Minnesota students joined this panel to ask questions and share their perspectives. So without further ado, here's that discussion.
I'm very eager to introduce our keynote panel. Where you're going to see folks on screen. Some of these folks you will see in person after we're done on screen because they're actually here in the building. What our panel will focus on discussing the role of national and multinational corporations and academia in collective sustainability, social responsibility, and community building efforts. Our featured panelist, you'll see him in a moment, is Michael Kobori. He has spent his career working to build a more just and sustainable world. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Starbucks Coffee Company, where he is responsible for leading Starbucks to become what they call resource positive, and for activating sustainability of the company's 350,000 partners and millions of customers worldwide. He also serves as an independent director of Bunge Limited, which is one of the world's largest agricultural companies, which connects farmers to consumers to deliver more sustainable food. Previously, Michael was the vice president at Levi Strauss & Company, where he built that company into a sustainability leader in the apparel sector. He is deeply committed to industry collaboration on sustainability. He has served on numerous boards, including the U.S. Cotton Board, Better Cotton Initiative, Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and the Levi Strauss Foundation Board. He has also served as vice president at BSR and spent nearly a decade at the Asia Foundation, where he supported human rights and economic development in Bangladesh, Thailand, and Vietnam. He has taught corporate sustainability at the Haas Business School at UC Berkeley, and he is the executive producer of the Utopia Theater Project, an artist-led social justice theater company. He sounds busy. Joining Michael are 2 of our homegrown stellar experts, Susanna Gibbons, who's an I&E Fellow, and she is the Managing Director for the Carlson Funds Enterprise, and Beth Mercer-Taylor. She is the Co-Program Director of Sustainability Education here at the Institute on the Environment. And our panelists will respond to moderated questions from Madonna Morris-Miliad Ebed, who is a Master's of Development Practice student at the Humphrey School, and from Bailey Webster, who is an MBA candidate at the Carlson School. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth, who I trust is going to appear on the screen for this conversation. I want to redirect us to Slido, and this is the number to type into, please. Slido enables for both of our 56 online participants to engage on equal footing with us, those of us in the room. And there he is, there's Michael. Beth, take it away, please.
Well, hello, everyone. I am appearing to you with a picture, hopefully, and I'm not yet on screen, and I think our tech team is working to address that. But I want to get started right away. We have so much to talk about. And yeah, I first want to just say that I was very fortunate to meet Michael Kabori while I was at UC Berkeley, while we were both earning master's degrees in public policy. And very fortunately for me, maybe why I'm even here with you today, is that we were in a study group together because some of our classes were really challenging. And most recently, when I had the opportunity to meet with Michael, when I was at a conference out in the Bay Area, he nudged me to get more serious about working with colleagues and students at our Carlson School of Management, our business school here at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. And I am really so glad I followed his advice, because that has led to collaboration with my co-panelist Susanna Gibbons and the students that you will see today. And I've learned so much. He was right, as always. So moving to our first question, the I&E community is really interested, as you just heard from Jessica, in delving into the challenges in sustainability, and especially speeding and scaling up quickly. We teach systems thinking as a way to do this with our students and with our colleagues. And so when I read the Starbucks Global Environmental Social Impact Report and saw that net zero carbon has been achieved by the company, and now the company aims for being resource positive in carbon, water, and waste, cutting footprints in half by 2030, I wonder and think about systems thinking. And so my question for Michael is, how do you lead the company to make this kind of ambitious change happen?
Well, thank you, Beth. It is such a pleasure to be here. And Beth, I should be careful with what I say to you. I don't even remember urging you to, to get more connected with the business school, but I'm glad you did. And yeah, for those of you who are in the audience, Beth and I were in the same study group. It was the parents' study group because we had kids when we were going through the policy program. And everyone else could study all night and they could do all-nighters, and we didn't. We couldn't, because we had to get home to our kids. So we had a great time. We had a great time there. Beth, your question is, I should just clarify first. We have not achieved net zero carbon by any means. That's our vision. That's our goal. The first target that we have is to reduce our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030. So we still have to reduce. We're nowhere near net. Ooh, boy, if we were at net zero already, wow, I could retire. But we're not there yet, but we're on our way. And you asked how we do that. So a couple of things. First is our 50% reduction target by 2030 is verified by the Science Based Targets Initiative, SBTI, as a science-based target to 1.5 degrees. So I'm assuming all of you are going to know what that means. And how we get there. So this is an ambitious target for any company, right? Cut your emissions in half. And it's very difficult for us as sustainability leaders to go to our business leaders, whether that's the head of our business in Japan or the head of the supply chain, and say, okay, yeah, go ahead, cut your emissions in half by 2030. You got 8 years to do that. They don't really know what to do, right? They're not sustainability experts. And so what we did when we started a couple of years ago, we did our carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions footprint. And we built that waterfall chart that said, okay, what are the biggest chunks of our business that contribute to that carbon emissions, right? And we found what were the biggest chunks. And so we set up 5 key strategies that we knew if we addressed these 5 key areas, then we could get to that 50% reduction. And the 5 key strategies are all based on business, and they're in business terms. The biggest thing we can do is shift to a more plant-based menu. All of you know, I assume, that plant-based proteins versus animal proteins have about 1/8 of the impact. Okay, so that's the biggest thing we can do. Second thing we said we needed to do we needed to, and we also have waste targets as well. Second thing we need to do is to shift from, what do I have? From single-use cups to reusable cups. And so we're testing all kinds of reusable cups now. Because we have a 50% waste reduction here. A third thing, more sustainable supply chain. And that particularly applies to dairy. So dairy is big out of Minnesota and Wisconsin, right? So reducing the dairy impact and also reducing the impact of growing all coffee. The fourth thing we need to do is move to a much more circular economy model for everything that we have and that we produce. And the last thing is to build greener stores and greener operations. So those are business strategies that business leaders can understand and actually set some targets and execute to. So Beth, sorry, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's what we had to set up.
I appreciated especially the theater interlude with the cups. Yeah, that it does seem like there's places for intervention from so many different, from the customers to the partners, to the supply chains that you touch on. I'm going to hand a chance to respond to Susanna now. And Susanna, maybe you can introduce yourself too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Susanna Gibbons. I'm the managing director of the Carlson Funds Enterprise. And just first of all, thank you, Michael, for joining us. Excited to have opportunity to chat with you this afternoon. I too was caught a little off guard when Beth said you had gotten to net zero. So I immediately I've got Bloomberg up in front of me and I immediately start looking at my numbers and I'm like, wait a minute, they've done it already. But I would note that you actually have made progress over the last couple of years in terms of getting reducing your carbon emissions. So positive from our standpoint. One of the things that I wonder about coming from a business school perspective is how you connect the plans with the CFO's office. I can understand aligning them with the business leader's office and where that makes sense. But I think one of the real challenges that we face as analysts is trying to figure out how to prioritize next steps and how to incorporate sort of the financing piece of it into your decisions. I'm wondering if you could chat about that a little bit, because that's something that we work on in Carlson, obviously.
Yes. Thank you so much for the question, Susanna. And I'm thinking of several ways that we connect with the CFO's office, right? I would say the first one is through investor relations. So something you're very familiar with. And so our investor relations team does the proxy calls with our investors twice a year. And I am invited to attend pretty much every single call. These are with our big investors, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, you know the list. And I'm invited to attend because they're all very interested in our targets that we've set and our progress to them and what are we doing about them. So investors, number one, are very, very interested. Number two, I'm sure all of you are studying and following the news that regulators are also very interested, both from an operational standpoint. I will tell you, Starbucks has 30,000 stores worldwide, 60 different countries all around the world. And out of those 30,000 stores, 7,000 have some sort of regulation on single-use cups. So almost a third of all of our stores, there's some regulation on single-use cups. At the bigger level, financial level, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, as I'm sure all of you know, has proposed some rules around carbon disclosure, climate emissions disclosure. And so all public companies are really scrambling to figure out, how do we measure our emissions? How do we measure and track them to a level that the controller's office, accounting, can actually externally verify that those are good, accurate numbers? And then we roll all of that up into a report. I was just on a call this morning with our controller and with our team and with the technology team. because all companies are having to put this in place, that system to actually measure your emissions. I guess the other area where we intersect with CFO's office is in, of course, how we finance all of this, right? And so certainly we get budget to do this. And we are also, as a company, using our balance sheet, right? So the company has cash from operations that usually just sits in a bank account or gets invested to earn money while it's sitting there. Some of that money we are able to use to invest in sustainability programs that pay back. Maybe it doesn't pay back at the highest market rate, but we get a payback for it. And so we're pretty progressive in utilizing our balance sheet cash to invest in sustainability programs. I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, that's
probably
the last piece is actually really exciting for us because I've been working on a project here at IONE for the last couple of years on how green bonds might finance GHG emission reduction in dairy farms specifically.
Yep.
So maybe I won't get into too much detail on that right now, but we would love to talk at some point down the road on our work, because I think there's a lot of potential for new instruments in capital markets to help bring necessary dollars into some of the mitigation activities. And Starbucks in particular has a couple of sustainability bonds out there. And
yes.
And so I'm wondering if you could just maybe touch on those briefly for people who don't know what a sustainability bond is. How did you decide to issue that? And what kinds of things did you invest in with your sustainability bond?
Yes. So I believe this happened before I got to the company. It was almost 10 years ago now, I think, that Starbucks issued the first sustainability bond of a corporation. And so what basically we did was you borrow money and you agree to pay it back at a certain interest rate. And what we said is we were going to use that money to invest in sustainability projects, and that's how the projects are going to pay back. So that's how we would pay back the money. And what we used it for was to invest in what we call our Coffee and Farmer Equity Program. And so that is our 20-year-old now sustainable coffee program, where we support coffee farmers at origin in coffee growing countries all around the world to improve their growing practices. So engage in sustainable agricultural practices. We teach them. We have farmer support centers in 10 countries around the world. It's basically like ag extension centers, where we're teaching farmers about sustainable ag techniques. And then that in turn allows them to improve the quality of their coffee. So quality is the other part of it. And that in turn enables them to sell to us and sell to others at a higher market rate. So they make more money. And that money also gets invested in their communities for community benefits, social welfare programs. So it's a very integrated, what we call people and planet sustainability approach at the farm. So this is what we used a green bond to invest in.
Susanna, I think we should move to our student.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
So that we have time, because they have thought through some really great questions. I'm so excited to hear this dialogue that's coming up next. So I think our first student to ask questions will be Madonna Abid. And maybe you can introduce yourself just quick and then ask the question.
Yes, hello, Mr. Kabari. Very nice to meet you, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. My name is Madonna Abeid. I'm a master's student studying international development and economics at Humphrey, so public affairs as well. And I have a background in finance and investment banking. So I have touched down on both areas. And I guess my first question is going to be a little bit related to Susanna's question, is that how does Starbucks handle the potentially higher costs of socially and environmentally responsible practices, and how do you usually convince the CFO or the shareholders with a decision that potentially has, to a great extent, higher costs, but economically and environmentally friendly?
Well, Madonna, thanks for the question. It's great to meet you. And what I would say is that sustainability investments might have higher upfront costs, but the payback is almost always there over the long run. So that's point number one, right? It may be higher, little higher cost upfront, like, sustainable lighting, for example. The cost of LEDs is a little higher upfront, but longer term, you amortize that through your operating costs, and bingo, the payback is right there, usually less than 2 years. Right? So that is, as we found in Starbucks, as well as at Levi Strauss, where I worked for many years, that is often the thing, right? The upfront cost is higher, so you got to get finance to invest the capital up front, but the payback is there, so you're going to get that benefit. The other thing I would say is there's something, as we look at the benefits of sustainability, there's one of the theories is something called the value driver model, which means there are 3 areas of benefit financially for investing in sustainability and social programs, I would add. The first is what they used to call reputation or risk reduction. I now like to call it resilience. It is investing for the long term in using fewer resources, less water, less fossil fuels, because in the long run, those commodities are going to be those resources are going to be very scarce, and their price is going to go up. So you're building a more resilient business. We've certainly seen it through the pandemic, where supply chains were very heavily disrupted, and we see it due to extreme weather events. Supply chains get extremely disrupted. So if you invest in sustainable approaches, you'll create a more resilient supply chain, a more resilient business. So that's one. The second area, of course, is just basic reduced costs, right? My theory, my belief is the sustainable product will always cost less because by definition, it uses fewer inputs. Now, subsidies offset that, so it doesn't always, right? But in a perfect market without all those subsidies, the sustainable product costs less. The last area of value that is driven by sustainability and social impact programs is growth. And that, as Susanna very well knows, is what investors care about the most, right? What is going to drive growth in your business? And so there's 2 aspects to that. One is the new products and services that will come from sustainability. You may not know this, but our iced brown sugar oat milk shaken espresso beverage, which I think most of you have probably had when you've gone to a Starbucks, when we introduced that about 1.5 years ago, it had a better introduction than pumpkin spice latte. Okay. The numbers were way better on ice shaken oat milk espresso than on pumpkin spice latte when that was introduced 10 years ago. So new products that are more sustainable. And the other thing that sustainability drives in terms of growth is innovation. Because sustainability, if you think about it, making that product or providing that service with fewer resources, more sustainably, that's a constraint on what your product developers do, on what your business does. And anytime you introduce a constraint on a process, you're forced to do it a different way and innovate. And so it leads to better innovation. Did I answer your question?
Thank you so much. And I think I have a task now to try the brown sugar latte for sure.
Okay, very good.
I think my next question is going to be, what are the metrics Starbucks use to measure the social elements of the ESG investing?
Yes. So I've only recently, a few months ago, I was asked to take, back in April, I was asked to take responsibility, in addition to sustainability, environmental sustainability, I was asked to take responsibility for our social impact and our community impact teams. And as I am immersed in that work and learning that work, one of the pleasant surprises I've found is the way they are measuring their impact because a lot of the community and social impact teams measure on, oh, how many participants did we reach? You know, that kind of thing. But they're focused on Human Development Index metrics. So looking at longer term educational levels, health levels, and income levels. So I was pretty happy to see that. It's not perfect yet, but they're working on developing those.
Thank you. And my last question is gonna be, can you talk a little bit more about the Greener Stores initiative? And are there any plans for Starbucks to transfer the existing stores into Greener Stores at some point in the future, distant future?
Yes. So Starbucks operates 30,000 stores in 60 countries all around the world. And we initially, probably more than 10 years ago, had started making our stores, building and designing our stores to the LEED standard, you know, leadership and in environmental and energy design, right? Energy efficient design. So we got like 2,000 stores certified on LEED. But after a while, our store development team started realizing, okay, we're building these stores to be more sustainable, but guess what? We're not operating them sustainably because LEED standard doesn't really speak to how you operate inside the store, how much water you're using, or, you know, do you have a good recycling program, or are the baristas educated on sustainability? And so we work with the World Wildlife Fund to create our own Greener Store standard that incorporated the LEED elements, but added on top of that, how we operate the store. So now we get both. And so that is how we in WWF are defining Greener Stores. Our target for this year, end of FY23, is going to be hitting 3,000 Greener Stores. We have about 2,000 right now. And the plan is that, to your question, yes, as we build new stores, we will build them to the Greener Store standard. But we are also scheduling when we retrofit stores, because every 7 years or so we got to retrofit a store, that those stores will be built or retrofitted back up to the Greener Store standard. Because you got to do both, right? You got to make sure all your new stores are greener, but then you also, as you go back with the existing base, you've got to build those back up. The goal is that by 2030, all of the Starbucks stores around the world, and by then it'll be probably about 50,000 stores, should be Greener Stores.
I think I am good. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And I think Bailey is up next.
Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Bailey Webster, and I am in the full-time MBA program at Carlson. I'm in my second year, and I'm in the funds enterprise with Susanna. And my background is in sustainable agriculture and nonprofit work. So I'm particularly interested in the agriculture side and curbing carbon emissions. And Michael, my first question for you is, when I was looking at your sustainability report, I noticed there was a little footnote that says, it said at this stage in our journey towards significant reductions, an increase in greenhouse gas emissions is expected. We're identifying, testing, and scaling innovative solutions across our global operations and engaging with our value chain while improving our measurement systems. I'm wondering if you can just expand on that and help us understand what are the innovative solutions you're looking at, and why is there an increase in greenhouse gas emissions in the short term?
Yes. Well, take your questions in reverse order. The reason for the increase is COVID effects. So we started with our baseline in 2019. That's when we measured our greenhouse gas emissions footprint. And what we found is, as COVID hit, our business activity dropped, right? Revenues dropped, we sold less product, there were fewer customers, and so we had less business activity. And so as a result, our greenhouse gas emissions dropped to almost 10%, because we were just consuming less. So naturally, you would expect a reduction. What we found is that as the pandemic eased, as our business activity and revenues resumed and got back to pre-pandemic levels, our emissions increased naturally. So
Got it.
that's the reason, right? There was a COVID dip and now we're coming back.
Mhm.
What we've been doing though, over the past 2 years of the pandemic is developing innovations. You said you were very interested in sustainable ag. So
Mhm.
dairy represents 22% of our total carbon emissions, right?
Okay.
Cows
Yeah.
are burping methane. And so that creates a lot more emissions than just emitting carbon dioxide. So one of the things that we've been testing is we have a division that works with startups. And so what they did was they invested in this company called Blue Ocean Barns
Mm.
that uses red seaweed as a feed additive for the cows, right?
Okay.
And
Yep.
and when the cows eat that, they burp 80% less
Wow.
methane.
That's amazing.
Okay.
Yep.
It's kind of like Beano for people, right? It reduces gas, basically. And so that's one of the innovations. So we're experimenting with things like that. We're putting biodigesters on some of our dairy farm co-ops that supply us. So we're doing things like that. Now, we know that there's a benefit. We're at this point, we're still trying to scale, right? Because it's been hard to scale stuff because of the pandemic, but now we've got the pilots running and we're beginning to scale. So I fully anticipate we're going to start getting some of the benefit of those innovations as our business builds back post-pandemic.
Got it. Interesting. Okay. Another question that I have for you is, so I imagine as you're adopting some of these technologies, there's going to be a point where you can't continue to reduce greenhouse gas emissions directly, right? Because
Yes.
at some point you
Mhm.
just will have emissions. And
Right.
I know that a lot of companies are looking at carbon offsets, and the science around carbon offsets is pretty unsettled at this point about how exactly it's going to work. I'm wondering, how are you thinking about that, and how is Starbucks involved?
Yes. So I think most of the leading companies, right, are focused on emissions reduction rather than offsets.
Okay.
We don't buy offsets. Okay.
Okay.
Now we do, because we have coffee farms, we work in coffee farms all around the world. We buy coffee. We are working on the farms to actually get farmers new, more resilient, climate resilient coffee trees. So our goal by 2025 is to provide 100 million new coffee trees for the farmers, because there's disease. There's something called coffee leaf rust that as a result of the warming climate attacks coffee trees. So we've been doing breeding, and now we're getting farmers new leaf rust resilient trees. So 100 million. So we're rebuilding the forests around our coffee farms,
Okay.
which is more called insetting than offsetting. Offsetting, you buy rights to a forest, and the carbon sequestration of forest doesn't matter where it is, it could be on the other side of the world. But if you're doing it within part of a business that you own or are involved in, then it's considered insetting, which is more acceptable from a carbon accounting standpoint.
Gotcha. So you're hoping with your coffee farmers to increase the amount of carbon they can sequester on their farms.
Exactly. And also through the regenerative agricultural techniques that they are learning, that will help too, right? As well as just more trees on the coffee farms themselves.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So my last question for you is, as a student in grad school interested in a sustainability career, I was talking to Beth. I actually was on a trip to Denmark with her to learn about sustainability in Northern Europe about a decade
Yes.
ago when I was an undergrad.
Mhm.
And I remember having conversations with her about, what job opportunities were out there. And she largely said, you can go and make your own opportunities. And now there's just an explosion of opportunities, and you don't have to make your own job. You can go into the field directly. And I'm wondering, what advice do you have for me and my fellow students in terms of what kind of skills should we be developing, and what Starbucks is looking for in people coming out of undergrad and grad programs?
Yes, I would say two things. One is absolutely hone your sustainability skills, life cycle assessment and so forth, right? All of those skills, materiality analysis, all of that stuff, right? That's kind of like the price of entry if you want to get a sustainability related job. But
Okay.
the thing these days, when I started like ages ago, I won't give Beth's age away. When I started a while ago, Beth is way younger than me, by the way. I'm way older than Beth. When I started like 20 years ago in sustainability, like they took anybody, right? Because there was nobody trained like you all are getting trained.
Mhm.
But today you're getting trained in all those sustainability skills. So you need those. But my very, very strong recommendation, don't stop there. Get
Okay.
skills in a business discipline. Distribution, logistics, supply chain, sourcing, product development, marketing, something. So
Mhm.
you have that business background to match and complement what you're learning on sustainability. Because what we do and what more companies are moving towards is embedding sustainability responsibility into the business functions. So I only have 9 people on my global sustainability team at Starbucks. 9 people for $35 billion company with 400,000 employees. 9 of us,
Mhm.
because we've given that responsibility and embedded it in supply chain, in product, in marketing, in the Japan business. So it's people in those businesses who are doing the sustainability strategy and executing it. We literally have 2 sustainable ag PhDs working on our dairy sustainability program, and they were hired by our supply chain.
Interesting.
Yeah. So sustainability skills, but the business skills equally important. And
Got
the
it.
last tip I'll give you, Susanna will vouch for this. The hottest thing right now is sustainable finance. So you got sustainability and finance. Ooh, you can write your own ticket.
Yep, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for those tips and answering my questions. I really appreciate it.
Of course, you're most welcome.
It's great to know that our messaging from the Institute on the Environment, that you can major in all kinds of fields and still pursue a sustainability job, is perhaps true. And particularly, I think, if you focus on some of the business skill sets. So that is great to hear that we're aligned. I want to ask you some of the questions that our audience members have been voting for on Slido right now, Michael. So I'm going to start with some of them that are getting the most support from the audience. So if you're in the audience, and you want your question, convince others to upvote it. I'm going to start with one I'm really curious about too. Could you elaborate on what a circular economy looks like in the context of Starbucks? Because you mentioned that.
Well, circular economy, I mean, the example that I would use is our cups, right? Right now, you go to Starbucks, you get a single-use cup, you consume the beverage, and you throw the cup away, okay? In a circular economy model, there's a couple of ways. One is you go to the Starbucks, and if you're sitting in the cafe, we give you your beverage in a ceramic mug that you consume there in the cafe. You're done. And you put it in the busing tray and we reuse it, okay? We don't need to make another one of these for your next beverage. Now, the other alternative is we give you a reusable cup, and when you're done consuming the beverage, you put it, we actually, in our headquarters, we have 100% reusable cups, no single-use cups in our headquarters, because we have these. You consume the beverage, you put it in a reusable kiosk, you scan it, you put it in the kiosk, it gets washed and reused. So there is no waste. Basically, you have a system that creates no waste. And then once this is like done after about 30 uses, then it is recycled into a new cup. I mean, that's just one example.
Yeah, I appreciate that example. That's just very tangible for all of us. And, kind of shows the corporate leadership and the responsibility of the culture to be moving in the same direction. So a good example, I like it. There's a harder question ahead. So the question is, do you think it's ironic that the best way to get to sustainability would be to get folks to drink coffee at home? And clearly those questioners presume that in fact, that would be more sustainable. I'll let you answer that, how you see it.
I don't think it's ironic at all. I mean, the at-home coffee business is one of our fastest growing segments, especially during the pandemic. People didn't want to go out, right? They were sometimes didn't want to go to the stores and interact with folks. So at-home coffee is growing tremendously. It's a great business for us, and I don't think it's ironic at all. You can still have growth and be sustainable.
Excellent. So I think you accept the implicit assumption there that the travel to the store and the use of the resources in the store would be less sustainable than just making your Starbucks or other coffee beverage at home. Is that right?
We have not done the deep LCA comparison on those alternatives, but certainly you're still right. Even if you're consuming the coffee at home, you still have to go to the grocery store to get it, right? Or it was delivered to you. So I can't say one is more or less sustainable. They're probably roughly equivalent, I would say. And you might even be able to make the argument that since we are producing the beverages at scale, we're doing it more efficiently. And in fact, I could say that certainly is true. We now have a new coffee machine that we're rolling out that will in the stores that will literally take 6 different types of whole beans, right, from 6 different regions or whatever, including decaf beans, and you literally push a button, it grinds the beans, and it brews in 30 seconds a fresh cup of coffee. So remember before we had to make the big urns and we just keep the coffee, and then after 30 minutes, if nobody drank, then we'd have to dump it. So this new single cup process reduces our water and our coffee and our energy consumption tremendously.
Oh, interesting. That's super interesting. This is the technology of coffee. I want to circle back to that circular economy question because Madonna raised in the chat a really good point. I thought about it a bit. What about the water of washing? And I know that's a discussion often with, single use or reusable. People want to know about water. So what do you have to say on that?
We have done the LCA on these reusable cups. They use 1/30 of the water that single-use cups use. Just because of all of the water that's required to produce the paper cup.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, that's an answer. All right, here's a hard question for you. So
Yes.
you happen to be in what some of our audience call the land of Caribou Coffee, a competitor. And we would
Okay.
like to know, how do you stack up relative to your competitors, I guess others besides Caribou, with respect to sustainability?
I'm not familiar with Caribou Coffee's sustainability targets. I would be surprised if they have signed up to reducing their carbon, water, and waste footprint 50% by 2030. But that's what I rely on all of you and the activist groups to do, is to check us out and you do the comparison and see who's better and then hold us accountable.
Okay, we can do that. Thank you. Okay, I want to move a little bit beyond the Starbucks specific questions. We had a number of those, to some of the trade-offs and some of the ways you think about decision making. So what are some trade-offs that you would consider and your team when lowering your carbon footprint versus how much time you have to do it? Could it be done faster? So I guess there's like speed and scale, and those are often brought together when we think about the best types of sustainability efforts, but this is sort of a speed or scale order.
Speed and scale, what are the trade-offs? Well, I would say the other aspect of that we need to think about is impact on the business. Right. So I often would say to our former CEO, the one who hired me, I would say, you know, because he would ask me, Michael, why don't we go faster on this stuff? You know, and I would say, well, Kevin, we can go faster, but it means we've got more upfront costs to do these investments that are going to impact the business. And so that is part of the calculus that you need to do, right? And frankly, sometimes you need time to scale this to get the customer and your employees used to a different way of doing things. And in fact, what I would say is for business, shifting your employees' mindset around sustainability is probably the single most important thing you can do. Because as business, we're used to thinking in terms of quarterly targets, right? You got to meet the street expectations every quarter. You got to deliver on your earnings and your share price and your earnings per share, right? All of that stuff. So you've got to deliver on that every quarter. Maximum, you're thinking of a year. And long-term planning in corporation is 3 years out because that's your strategic planning cycle. But our targets are for 10 years out. We're trying to reimagine how we do our business in a very different way. And so getting people in a company to think like that and to reimagine what the future could be is the most challenging, but the biggest payoff thing that you can do. Because we've been able to do that at Starbucks with our reusables team. And now, I mean, when I started, our reusables team leader said, oh, Michael, we'll always have to have single-use cups. We can never go to 100% reusables because of whatever reasons, right? She just didn't believe we could do it. And now, after 2 years, she's the biggest champion of moving to 100% reusables and not even give the customer choice. She said, oh, that's the only way we're going to get there, 100% reusables. She changed her mindset.
Wow.
Maybe I could jump in with a sort
ahead.
of question alongside that.
Yeah.
Or do you see investors starting to shift their mindset at all? I mean, there's been so much bad press around ESG lately, but I'm wondering if analysts who are interested in your ESG metrics are starting to think longer term.
You know, it really, I would say, Suzanne, it depends on the company. It depends on the investor. And some are very committed to the long term and sticking with it, and others have gone a little more quiet on us.
I think we should end with a question here that's really imperative for us. It's how can universities support you and your sustainability work at Starbucks and other, large corporations that can drive that kind of culture change? And I guess also hold you accountable as well. So if you can give us some specific priorities, we'd love that.
Professor Hellman and I were actually on a panel at Green Biz, which is in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a big sustainability conference. And one of the other people on the panel, and we were talking about the role of universities in sustainability and business. And Starbucks has a long-standing partnership with Arizona State University. And about a year and a half ago, we set up with them a center for the future of people and planet. And we have been trying different things, like they tested reusable cups and plant-based menu in the Starbucks cafes on campus and some things like that. But what we realized over the past 12 months, they can do that, but we test in our stores as well. So that's not the biggest value add from the university. The biggest value add from the university, two things that they do well that we don't. One is longer term planning. As your professors are thinking about the world and doing research, you are thinking 20 years in the future. I said, we think 3 years in the future. So that long-term planning is extremely valuable to us, at least those of us who are trying to get the business to think differently. And the other thing that you all do very well, which I heard in the session right before this, is we think in silos. We got finance, we got supply chain, we got marketing, we got product. We're very siloed. But at the university, you think in the system. And that is really helpful to us. It's helpful to somebody like me who's actually trying to change the system. So you can help me quite a bit on sustainability.
Thinking in systems, it's just resonating. So we just keep on, but I think we need more partnerships like what you've got happening at ASU. Susanna, did you have another note? I think we need to move to wrapping up, but do you have another quick?
I do not. I just really would love to follow up at some point on green dairy bonds, because the critical thing for green dairy bonds is actually systems thinking. In order to be successful, the project draws on so many different systems, and trying to get each system to move by itself is really hard. And so we do need collaborations.
Well, there's not just the bond. Now we got the IRA. So there's like, right, 50 billion in there for sustainable ag. And I know Secretary Vilsack, Agriculture Secretary Vilsack, I think I know he's very interested because we've been talking to him about net zero dairy for some time.
Very nice.
And this, everyone, is how collaborations begin. So, you know, the relationships and the shared ideas, and, you know, from there, perhaps we have some opportunities for projects within that IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, that, from what I understand, has changed the at least energy transition funding for the next 10 years in North America from US, from, you know, what is it, 100 trillion, yeah, it's by an order of 3. So it's now many trillions of dollars more than it would have been. And the challenge for all of us in the universities and in the corporate world will be kind of ready to take up those projects and to have those systems thinking leaders poised to start and do those projects. So it's a really exciting time. Michael, do you have some sort of final thoughts for our audience as we're closing out this really incredible session of learning and sharing together?
Thank you, Beth. I really wanted to thank you and Susanna and Bailey and Madonna really for inviting me, for your great questions that really stimulated my thinking on this. Something we didn't really talk about is equity and environmental justice. So I will just leave you with that thought. And I know some of you are studying international development and development economics. And I want you to know that I have recently been invited to be on something called the Advisory Committee for Voluntary Foreign Aid. So it is a group of public and private sector citizens and leaders who advise the U.S. Agency for International Development on foreign aid, foreign assistance. And so Samantha Power was on the phone with us this morning. And one of her big challenges to us was this whole question of environmental justice and equity.
Well, that just warms my heart. And I'm going to turn things over back to Jessica Hellman to wrap up this session.
Everyone, again, who is joining us. I know several of you are in the building, some of you are not, some of you are far, far away. We're saving lots of carbon by having Michael join us remotely. We're really thankful for that. Thank you, Michael, Susanna, Beth, and our two stellar Bailey and Madonna, extraordinary U of M student. We can see, we know you love ASU, but look at these U of M people. They're really, really.
Thank you for watching this event. Stay tuned for more engagement opportunities with the Institute on the Environment. You can learn more about the Institute on the Environment on our webpage, environment.umn.edu. And we look forward to hosting you again.